morning of light. Earlier we were greeted by our colleague and friend Reda with Salam alaikum, peace may be upon you. I invoke light in these dark times, knowing that darkness might be the lowest intensity of light. And so there is always hope. Dear colleagues, dear friends, it is a true honor to be here with you today on this panel on complexity, society, and global challenges. My name is Karima Kadaoui. I am the co-founder and executive president of Tamkeen for Our Humanity Foundation, member of the Club of Rome, and member of the International Society for System Sciences. I am very honored today to chair, and beyond chairing, I think, to try to co-facilitate a discussion, a conversation, and a co-reflection for shared understanding to grow. And yesterday when we met the three distinguished and outstanding panelists, one of the questions I asked is, what would you like to be revealed during a panel discussion? So we still don't know. We will discover it together. We will be in resonance with you, your words, your questions, but also your listening, your presence are going to be the ones who will vibrate the resonances and the inspirations today within our panel. 2 days ago, actually, after receiving the abstracts of our panelists, I opened the LLM session and was very warmly greeted by the LLM, and I answered Sabah al-Noor. And then I said, can you please reflect, explore, what are the different spheres of prehension that are offered by the different panelists? By spheres of prehension, I refer to Whitehead. Beyond what I perceive, what I feel into, what I grasp as reality, and that very gesture of grasping leaves deep traces in my becoming. I also ask, and what could emerge in the between, referring to François Julien, in the between of these three spheres of prehension? What intrigued me most about the answer was the LLM calling the abstracts the Sabah al-Noor abstracts. So that tells us maybe that artificial intelligence doesn't quite understand, but maybe there is some kind of prophecy there, because he invoked the Sabah al-Noor abstracts. And by invoking Sabah al-Noor, we don't invoke only the morning and the greetings in the morning, but we also invoke the light that dispels the darkness, the light that brings clarity, and the light that connects the earthly to the divine. And indeed, we are in troubled times. Maybe in times where for the very first time we have existential questions, where the volatility, the impulse of decision makers could press on a nuclear button and create conditions of apocalyptic consequences, where wars no longer have laws, where genocide is justified, where the digital transformation is going so fast and is very little understood by so many. Yet today, Our distinguished panelists, my friends and colleagues, Carlos Álvarez Pereira, David Chavalarias, and Klein, are going to be sharing with us their reflections, their ontopistemic stance, reflecting our civilizational questions, reflecting questions that actually question the very fabric of our shared humanity. I am very delighted to present to you Carlos Álvarez Pereira, who is a colleague, a friend from the Club of Rome, and who is a polymath. And I would say, I'm not sure how you will hear it, Carlos, the imbatuta of the topography of human convenings, where the question is, how can we create better futures? What future civilizations are we able to become? Carlos invites us to revisit the trajectory of modernity itself, unfolding in this connection from the logic of life. Through his reflection, No Limits to Hope, escaping from the unreasonable effectiveness of modernity. He challenges us to consider whether we can move beyond cycles of unintended consequences, not through fear, but through what he calls an attitude of active hope. We will start with Carlos. Then we will turn to David Chavalarias, researcher at the CNRS, an expert in complex systems and computational social science. It was such a pleasure to meet you yesterday, David. So David brings our attention to a transformation that is quietly but profoundly reshaping our societies. The emergence of large-scale digital infrastructures that mediate our interactions, our perceptions, and I would add maybe even a collective sense of self. And increasingly, a cultural evolution creating a monoculture of cultures. Finally, Klein, the Secretary General of the International Federation for Systems Research, and a leading and very, very often a thought-provoking voice in the global systems and cybernetics community, will widen our horizons, drawing on the concept of the noosphere. The idea that human thought itself constitutes a planetary layer of organization. And building on this, he will explore in the mirror of lived experience, in the mirror of Tamkeen, as he says, the notion of a noospheric singularity, a possible phase, transition, into which humanity's collective cognitive processes reach a level of reflexivity that allows the system to begin understanding, recognizing, and I would add, recognizing and shaping itself. I'm particularly moved that Klein is here today because we've been working together for 7 years in the context of research and a socio-systemic complexity evaluation, reflecting Tamkeen as a process and experience in Morocco. So bearing in mind that what we are inviting today here is very much to ponder and wonder when 3 different spheres of prehension meet. And when they meet, what might emerge? What is the understanding that might widen, that might grow? What are the ontopistemic sites from which each speak? And what is the mesological explorations they offer, going to mesology, the science of the milieu of Berck. So I am truly delighted and honored to invite you, Carlos, to the floor.
Sabah al-Nur, buenos días. You will have understood from the presentation that Karima made that she's a very good friend. I'm a bit overwhelmed by the mention to in Batuta. That cannot be more generous. I will give you some glimpses of ideas, of provocations. This is the role of the Club of Rome since we exist. We try to be the agent provocateur, asking better questions for the future of humanity. And I'm particularly grateful to Reda, Mohamed, and Nicola for inviting me to this conference, and to, of course, UM6P, with which we are developing a strong and stronger collaboration for the organization, and for creating the opportunity to share with you from my position of Secretary General of the Club of Rome, but also, and as such, creator of a program that we call the Fifth Element, which in itself, the name is in itself a tribute to the idea of weaving ancient traditional knowledge and modern science, but also from my personal perspective. From the point of view of the Club of Rome, we could feel very frustrated in a way. We live in a paradoxical feeling because, as you might know, if you know something about the Club of Rome, we raised the alarm already in 1972 about the limits to growth. We asked the question, how could be human development for everybody on the planet be compatible with what we now call the planetary boundaries? We were not making predictions. We were inviting to learning, for humanity to learn. And many years later, by now the Club of Rome should have disappeared, because ideally, the success of the limits to growth, millions of copies sold, and we really created a debate which led later to the concept of sustainable development and so on. Ideally, we would have learned, humanity would have learned how to escape the trap in which we are. Unfortunately, we didn't learn the trap of the incompatibility. This graphic is a very simplistic, of course, summary of the trap of human development leading to ecological unfeasibility. And because, the dots in this graphic are countries, and you can see, many dots on the side of low levels of human development index, meaning the combination of GDP per capita and levels of health, life expectancy, and education levels. Many countries, I say, with a low human development index, but also low ecological footprint. Many countries on the opposite side, high levels of human development and very high levels of ecological footprint, so much so that it looks like human development implies we need more than one planet to make it possible. Actually, right now, our overall ecological footprint is close to 2 planets. And we cannot afford that because we only have one. And what is worse, of course, this graphic is also showing the extreme level of inequality among countries, but also we could see within the countries. And the fact, and it is not in this graphic, but we could animate the graphic and you would see that the dots with development go from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, but but go to higher levels of ecological footprint. And some countries are somehow in this metric doing the magic of combining both, but it's not the countries you would think of first. It's not the Nordic countries, for instance. It's rather countries in Latin America like Cuba or Costa Rica or in Southeast Asia. So interestingly, we haven't solved this question. We haven't learned how to make our human development compatible with the Earth on which we all live, with the ecosystem, which inevitably drives us to a question about, so first I said inequality is a very strong reason why we are not being able to combine both. Our projections, our simulation of scenarios, even from the limits to growth, some of them were saying this is feasible, this balance is feasible, but it requires a much more equitable world, far away from what we are seeing these days. But also this interrogates us to say, but what is a good life? Is it, the American way of life, with a higher and higher, which is not only high ecological footprint, it means that progress is associated to higher and higher ecological footprint, and that's not feasible. So, provocation, in the context of this conference, my first provocation is we have been used to reflect in these terms with separate layers for these three terms. Reality, for sure we don't have direct access to reality. We receive perceptions from reality and we make sense of them through our frameworks of interpretation, which are largely implicit, largely unconscious. But my point is that we have become used in modernity, Western modernity with a capital M if you wish, to separate knowledge as a layer, and action as a different layer. And we have categories and we have even disciplines in philosophy and in the philosophy of science, to designate these different things. Ontology, what is, epistemology, what we understand. And then action is separate, the very interesting way of disconnecting our levels of reflection, the understanding, the elaboration, the creation of knowledge separate from the purposes and the ethics, what should be. But can we actually do that? And even more, we have created disciplines and a whole apparatus of social apparatus and processes and institutions to embody this separation. So science is supposed to be the mediator, between reality and knowledge. And there are two powerful mediators from what we know, make what we do, whether it is what should be or not. As we saw from the presentation by Peter, warfare is technology has been largely driven by the development of warfare. But this is where the technology is using knowledge, for our action, and terribly enough, we are validating that our action can be violent over other humans, for sure, as Karima mentioned, and Reda as well, now genocide is naturalized, but also over the ecosystem. So my provocation is this separation between these layers and this specialization of functions is highly problematic. And it is at the same time a central characteristic of modernity, disconnection, separation. We are different from nature, which has some grounding, in which, we want to live more, we want to separate from nature because we wanted to expand our life expectancy, so have more healthy lives, not being exposed directly to everything that comes from the ecosystem. This is the incentive, you know, the grounding, but this concept of, or this practice, not concept of disconnection, of separation, has become a characteristic of modernity. The industrialization of disconnection, I would say. Problem is that industrialization of disconnection creates fragmentation. I loved the references by Reda to the irresponsibility of the elites. We are in an episode like that. The fragmentation of societies, of cultures, you know. The social fractures by which you make that you are part of a group, you reason in terms of us and them, and us, we are entitled to something, you know, and to be rich, for instance, and then since we are entitled to be more powerful and rich, we also assume that we are some kind of moral entitlement that make us look at them, you know, as separate. Those social fractures, of course, have a price, which is a higher level of fears. Interesting that modern societies, and the more modern, the less you see fear disappearing, right? Modern society is much more comfortable, material comfort and so on, but not less fears, rather the opposite. And the fears lead to the anxiety for control, because we feel that things are escaping from us, you know, and we fear the consequences, which create the opportunity for exploitation, and that also creates tensions. And then this is a loop, because we have crises, of course. We live in one, you know, but what are the conditions for us to learn something from this crisis that would not reinforce the same loop and initiate yet another cycle of disconnection from reality, from the biophysical realities, from life, with a capital L, if you wish. And this is where this issue of power and learning, and the chasm between power and learning, comes in. You know, first time I was exposed to this reflection by Karl Deutsch, a political scientist from middle 20th century, from Czechoslovakia, but migrated to the US. You know, I was really struck. You know, power is the ability not to have to learn anything. You know, this opposition between power and learning. Very interesting, and I must say, actually very realistic. So, when we acquire power, we use it to isolate ourselves from other people and from nature, from the ecosystems of which we are part. So much so that we want not to have to learn anything. We want to be everything to be predictable and sure for us. And this is an issue when we talk about why didn't we learn in this decades-long process of understanding our consequences of our development on Earth, climate change, whatever, you name them. One has to recognize that the people who are talking, including myself, where people who are talking about that are not the people exposed to the real consequences of our actions. And then, and I almost finish my provocations. The fact is that we realized very early in the cycle of the Club of Rome this issue. This is why we published 1979 a book titled No Limits to Learning, which was addressing the key question of what Aurelio Peccei, the founder of the Club of Rome, called the human gap, the difference between our capacity to act and our capacity to understand the consequences of our actions and deal with them, our capacity to understand complexity in the end. Interestingly, my hypothesis is this is a characteristic of modernity, but we can do better, we have done better, from previous civilizations and cultures that have not disconnected, that have not industrialized disconnection. This is not a human characteristic. We are capable, and this is what the book was saying, we are capable of anticipation, of participation, we're capable of learning in participatory way and about the consequences of our actions. This is the provocation that we also included in Limits and Beyond in 2022. And in a book, and it will be more than one book, actually, it's a whole project now taking the shape of multiple works that we call No Limits to Hope. Looking at, from the messages of No Limits to Learning, where are we now? How is our capacity for collective learning? How do we use that? Is technology, we will hear from David very interesting reflections on the role of technology. Is it increasing our capacity for collective learning, or the opposite? Or what should we do to ensure that the technological developments help us in learning to reconcile Earth and humanity across a process which needs also to be circular and cyclical, but where we need to have all parties involved, not only us, to, through cycles of learning, go in that direction of what I call the reconciliation of Earth and humanity and the development of ecological civilizations. In plural, because those civilizations need to be adapted to their contexts, to the historical, cultural, geographic contexts, in what we call pluriversality. So, what are my provocations? Many thanks for your attention. I hope that will nurture the dialogues now and later. Thank you.
I'm very honored to invite you, David, to the floor. I would just like to add that David is a researcher as a CRS, and he is an expert in complex systems and computational social science.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. Thank you to Mohamed Nemish and Reda who invite me here. I'm very happy to be here. So I will just share a few reflections because we decided to leave more space to discussion. So about what we could observe in terms of cultural evolution and the impact of big digital infrastructure on them. So first, I will start with a film that shows you raw data about what we have observed on social networks. About we have observatories on different topics, like for example, French politics or climate debates or COVID debates. So now I will show you a small film, if we can put this, about what we have observed during the pandemics, about the debates on vaccines research. Or actually on vaccines, just vaccines. And this is, we have taken data from at the time it was Twitter, so we were taking data from Twitter about discussion about COVID vaccines in different countries. We did this in French and in English. And what we will show is how this discussion has unfolded through time. Just wait before you activate it. How the discussion have unfolded through times at a global level. And what is interesting here is that COVID is a new disease. Vaccine is also a new product. So the question is how people will set their mind about how it is useful or not and what they should do. And you will see that, as we have all experimented, there is huge polemic on that, but you will see how it gets structured. So now we can make play. So basically what we get is every message that has COVID in it and other things. And what you will see is this in dynamics in a few minutes. So here, every point is a Twitter account, and the links that you see are sharing of information between accounts. So it is retweets. And the colors show you who is pro-vaccines, who is anti-vaccines. Every pulsation is 10 days. Here we are in 2020, the month of June. So every 10 days you have a pulsation. And here you see the structuration of the debates of vaccines that is happening between, here in the US, you have anti-vax here and pro-vax here. And here in France, you have anti-vaxxer here and pro-vaxxer here, and you have also Canada in between. So here you see the morphogenesis of powerful groups of opinion about these vaccines and how people get into the debates, also get outside the debate. Here you have Robert Kennedy that just get out, but he was in just before. And you have this big bipolarization in every country about around these topics. And what you see also is that you have these purple lines between the French anti-vaxxer here and the US anti-vaxxer here, which are the streams of disinformation that is moving and coming from the US sphere to the French sphere. And the color is the color of the account that is looking for the information. So here what you see is that the French disinformation ecosystems was very active in taking information or disinformation from the US sphere and bringing it back to the French sphere. So now we are in the end of 2021, and so COVID is disappearing. So you see that the blue ones are just leaving the game, but still the red and purple, they are staying here, but they are like saying, we have confined us on purpose, it's like a plot from the government, etc., etc. And they stayed like that until they moved to another issue. So we can go back to the presentation. This is just to show you how a group of people can form online and make like factions between pro and anti something. And we have a globalized domain where we have information transfer between geographical areas that are very far from each other. And, okay. And this COVID disinformation has some consequences. So for example, this is the gap between death in countries with a large proportion of pro-Trump votes that were promoting, that were not only against vaccines, but also against masks and all these things, and countries with a large proportion of pro-Biden votes that were more following the CDC preconization. And we have now the same with the measles, because we have now quite of rejection of measles vaccines, which is illness that can easily be cured, but because people now don't like vaccines because of the COVID in particular, and because also there is now Kennedy Jr. at the head of the Department of Health in the United States, then a lot of people do not vaccinate their kids, so we have more measles, so this is more death. So this means that you can have gaps between what should be good for a population and what some part of population are actually following or implementing. And this is not only a gap of knowledge, because of course for the COVID vaccines, some could legitimately question something because it was new, something like that. So there was like we are in an unknown area for some of them. But if you look, for example, for climate change, then climate change, this is one of the first article in Popular Mechanics, in 1912 that is saying that if we burn all the coal, underground coal, then we will have problem with the climate. So this is more like 100 years ago. And still, when you look at the global debates about climate change on, again, this is again on Twitter, then you see that you still have a big cluster of climate denialists here on the left. So this means that we have huge part of societies or humanities that goes the way which could compromise the future of humanity. So this means that we have to interest ourselves to how behavior shape and form at large scales and how branch of humanity can go maybe the wrong way. What is interesting is that, for example, the suspicion with climate science and the suspicion with vaccine science are aligned across global communities. So, for example, here you see that the people that were saying that COVID vaccine were unsafe or that it was a plot from the government, etc., they are actually almost the same as the ones that say that climate change is a hoax and that it is a way to control population. So we have this, and this is of course on social networks. This is not a general things about everybody, but this is what we observe on social networks. And so this question ourselves about what is this impact of this kind of digital infrastructure in shaping opinions. And we really have to understand why there is a so huge gap between what we know. So this is again from the Meadow report that we are predicting actually what is happening now. And this is also what is the direction we are going now, that we are crossing 9 boundaries from the Earth limits. So how it is possible that despite that the knowledge is here, a lot of people and actually full communities of people are going in the opposite direction that compromise their own future. So we have to understand that all this happen in a context where we have reached a point where the mistakes made by certain elements of our globalized society could just destroy humanity. For example, now Trump is in power. If he decides to launch a nuclear war, then it might be the end. And this also changed the cultural evolution as we used to think of it. We used to think like societies, they thrive, they fail. Those who thrive, they transmit something to other society in the future. Those they fail, we don't hear of them anymore, or they use as a counter-example of what not to do. But now, if, for example, United States fails, or if China fails, then it could be the end for everybody else. So we have to understand what shapes cultural attractors, yes, and how it is possible that we have all these movement in directions that are exotic or orthogonal to human and humanity well-being. So if we look at what is society in very broad sense, so it's a group of people that make some cooperation and that share common norms and behavior and culture. And when this become globalized, then we have several interdependent societies that de facto share a common hearth and should, in principle or ideally, interact cooperatively to guarantee the sustainability, which is absolutely not what is happening now. So what we have to understand is that all these social structures, social groups, society, globalized societies, are the results of interactions and identities coevolution between people. I mean, we are the ones that form these societies that aggregate into higher order superstructures. So we have to understand what could be perturbed at a lower level. So this is a quote that I like from Hayek, which is distinguishing cosmos and taxis. And he sees societies as a cosmos, like as a spontaneous order. So we can talk about that during the panel, but what is important here is that the cosmos or spontaneous orders has no predefined ends. It could have many attractors, and one of them is selected. And this selection could be contingent, or this could be oriented, but you have many attractors. And the attractors that is chosen, or actually the attractors that are possible, they are emerging from the regularities of the behavior of the element which is comprised, or we can even say the regularity of the cognitive capacity of the behavior which is comprised. And if we look at how these groups are shaped, there are two pillars that shape the social fabrics. One is homophily, and the other is influence. People interact with others that tends to be similar to them, but also people become similar to other people by interaction. And when you aggregate all these phenomena, then they may be social groups and states, etc., etc. So what we have to understand from the perspective of digital technology, which is mine here, of course there is a lot of other phenomena to be interesting, is that if you look at social technologies like social networks and AI, they are now perturbating these two pillars. I mean, social networks are filtering what we see, they are filtering what others see from us, they are filtering what we understand, and same from AI. So we have to really deeply, and this is a question for the panel later, we have to understand the impact of this new technology on the cultural evolution. And just to give you a very few quick examples, we have demonstrated that on social networks like Twitter's, then what people see are 49% more toxic than what they asked for. So there is a gap between what you asked on the social networks in terms of subscription and what we get in your news feeds. So imagine that at the scale of 500 or 600 million people believe that the environment is more hostile than it actually is, then this is a problem. And this is why engagement maximization in social recommender systems are driving societies toward hostility and disintegration. And so we have recommender as an element of artificialization of the cultural evolution. These are changing really the deep dynamics of cultural evolution. And just to end with AI also now is getting deeply into our intimacy and relation to other. People fall in love with AI. People change their cognitive capacity because of AI. For example, when you lose GPS, you lose a sense of orientation. When you lose LLM to think, then you lose a sense of reflections. And we also observe an evolution on the path of innovation. We can talk about that, but this is a representation of the discovery made with AI and discovery made without AI in blue and in red and blue. And what have been shown on analysis of a large amount of paper is that discovery made on AI, they can be faster, but they are concentrated about in area where we have already discovered things. So it's merely interpolation of what we have seen. Merely it's an expression, but human alone are going further. So this is my last slide. So given the end of cultural evolution and the informational interdependence between human and being as a humanity skills, which information technology will guarantee the survival of humanity? And my guess is that the ones that have been deployed these last 10 years are not the good one, and that we have to make a transition from that kind of technology to more decentralized technologies that are more respectful to human freedom, data privacy, etc. So thank you very much, and so now we can go.
Thank you very much, David. Now, Louis, please join the floor. And so I just remind that Louis is the Secretary General of the International Federation for Systems, for the Systems Research.
Yes, thank you so very much. Thank you for the invitation to this conference, which is not my first in that role. Actually, 14 years ago in Agadir, that was my first time to join the World Conference on Complex Systems, and I returned. Wonderful, we have the picture here. I want to express my deep gratitude for the introduction, Karima, but also for that wonderful composition that we saw already in the flow of the morning. Starting, Reda, with your beautiful presentation, guiding us towards where we are, from where we came from, towards the limits of the theory. We need theory beyond complexity. This is what I took from your presentation, and I agree very much. That is not saying we need to abandon, not at all. Keep it, but build on it. Reach out, systems, cybernetics, and the lot. I'm very intrigued by Peter's presentation about cultural evolution, cultural development. Where are we heading? How did we get where we are? What trajectory are we on? And that, connecting to you, Carlos, we are not on a very good course, indeed. However, and this is where the hope comes, we have the hope to learn. We can learn that, we can recognize that, what kind of trajectory we're on. And thank you very much, David, bringing us in that new layer of exchange that we see there with the social media, and how the infrastructure, the medium, becomes a player in the discourse of what we think is real and what is not. And now I'm coming with a short presentation on Noospheric singularity. And what that is, I share in a minute from over there. But I like to invite you to recognize the picture. Under the stars, in this case, it looks like a desert, but the most important thing is in the very center. There's light, but more so, there's a circle of people gathered around that source of light and warmth, sharing stories. So the question to you, audience, is who has ever been in such a setting? Forget about the desert, but really sitting around with your friends, sharing stories, co-reflecting your lived experience. Who has experienced that at one point in his or her life? So that's the majority. That seems to be something accessible to all of us. And now I'm going to take it from here. In such a circle, from co-reflected lived experience, grows a shared understanding. And that shared understanding informs what we believe to be and to be possible, what is and what could grow from it. This is what guides us in our decisions and choices to organize our together being, our witness with each other and with the nature we are immersed in or we are part of, to be more precise. This is where it all starts. This is where the hunter-gatherers and foragers started the journey. And though the slides, which require a linearity, as we saw with Peter, this is not a sequence of things that come and go. These are sequences of accumulation. The possibility to sit around in a circle, to co-reflect lived experience, has never gone. Has always been there, and this is where we as human beings feel the most integrated, immersed in whatever we call social ecosystems. And now I jump to my slides here. Noospheric singularity. And I try to be quick to unpack that to make room for the conversation and discussion that we want to have together here on the stage to explore the in-between of our different presentations, of our different inputs. I jump over that. Singularity. I skim briefly over it. Singularity as a term is very much connotated with the different versions of von Neumann, Kurzweil, Ray Kurzweil especially. The moment where the computing capacity of that planet exceeds the human capacity to think and connect. The noosphere, going back to Vernadsky and Teilhard de Chardin, is thought as a layer of thought in its own right, moving from the geosphere, so the material landscape, to the biosphere, all that lives on the planet in its totality, to a sphere of thought, thinking, understanding that encompasses the entire planet in a way that at some point, Vernadsky and Teilhard de Chardin assumed that this connection will be so dense, so interconnected and interdependent that it creates a sphere in itself encompassing the entire biosphere. And leaning into philosophy, Schelling, Hegel, and later Lovelock, that provides a capacity of awareness. As Schelling said once, in the human being, nature opens its eyes and realizes that it is. It's almost like the brain of the biosphere. The biosphere is already self-regulating. However, with that kind of a global awareness of itself, it can start to self-regulate consciously. It's almost like opening the possibility to garden the biosphere, or more so, to think of the biosphere as a garden that knows, through that noosphere, that knows it is a garden and has the awareness of its capacity to self-regulate. Looking at Carlos, before it is too late. And this is what we very much find at the very heart of the Club of Rome, to find ways to inform and ignite that awareness. For my own work, that vision of a noospheric singularity, sort of an awareness, a consciousness of the biosphere, of itself, resonates strongly with regenerative hermeneutics. And I'm going to unpack that as well. Hermeneutic phenomenology is to a certain extent describing that very scene that we saw in the picture just before. Going to the lived experience to grow a shared understanding of what is and what could grow from it. The hermeneutics, the science of, the philosophy of understanding, trying to understand understanding, as we saw it in the lineage of Schleiermacher, Dilthey, Heidegger, and Gadamer. The phenomenology in the lineage of, we may include Hegel, Husserl, again Heidegger, and very important Merleau-Ponty, to acknowledge it's not just in the head, it's not just the cognition. Any kind of understanding is as well embodied. We may, especially when we go to a third-person kind of research, kind of artificially separate ourselves from that interconnectedness of life and being a living being in it. However, it remains artificial, and phenomenology is at the moment still the best way to embrace the whole without the need to defining it. The shared understanding grows from core reflected lived experience in any kind of social ecosystem. We were looking at the circle in the desert. We can think of the community. We can think of the neighborhood. We can think of a school, of an entire education system. We can think of organizations. We can think of the economy. We can think of the government. And just as a brief reminder, where in your workspace do you make time and hold the space for that kind of a reflection in which a social ecosystem opens up its possibility to understand itself, what it is and what it could be? Karima was indicating earlier that for the last 7 years we've been working together here in Morocco with Tamkeen and the Tamkeen process, which is very much building and growing out of that circle that I introduced earlier, of which, again another connection to the Club of Rome, the former co-president Mampela Rampele once said, "The circle where we share the stories is the most noble social technology we know." It is characterized as a Tamkeen process, an experience-based, relationship-oriented, co-created, co-facilitated process of inquiry, learning, and understanding, embedded in epistemic humility, trusting our human potential and trusting our humanity, realizing the essentiality and existentiality of love. We're looking at confluence here. We're looking at the confluence not only of different scientific perspectives or traditions of discourse and conversation and dialogue. We're looking at a confluence of all matters of human life, up to the spiritual aspects of it, up to the very feelings, the very emotions that we bring wherever we go, and to not exclude them, but to invite them into the space where the lived experience is not just an utterance about something, but allowing to be with ourselves as whole human beings. Here is the inescapable reminder that we published something on it, and we published with the Journal of Systems Research and Behavioral Science a paper on realizing metamorphic transformation in the mirror of Tamkeen, where you could revisit a lot of what I could just tease here in my brief presentation. Before we enter the conversation here on the panel, I land on a vision that opens up a different dimension to what we've visited so far in the course of the morning. The vision of a resilient and regenerative social ecosystem, or social ecosystems, up to the level of a global civil society. So not waiting for being organized to grow a shared understanding, but reaching out wherever we are, cross boundaries, and the social media make that possible, to allow a vision of eco-civilizations to grow, co-creating the conditions for human co-flourishing and societal harmony. So not waiting for a debate on what goals to pursue, but trusting our human potential, trusting our humanity, that out of this kind of a collective meaning quest, the core reflection of lived experience does grow something that will be an expression of that very humanity. Thank you so very much. And if there was only one thing you take away from my brief presentation, remind the photo and seize any possibility to reach out, especially to those you do not yet know, to get to know them. And you may want to start in the course of this conversation, walk up to the people you do not know yet, ask them how they were and what brought them to the conference. It may be the start of a very beautiful conversation. Thank you.